What's up guys, Christopher Burris here with another lens review, and today we're looking at the Tamron 28-75mm. It is the lens that spends the most time on my camera bodies because of how versatile, how lightweight and small it is, as well as how good the image quality is. So we're going to take a look at that today. Don't forget to like this video and go ahead and subscribe, and let's get into the review. First things first, let's go over some physical design aspects of this lens here. It's 28-75, which is not quite as wide as 24mm like your standard 24-70 lenses, but it still is a very versatile zoom range. Rarely have I ever found myself wanting wider than this without wanting to go to a full-on wide-angle lens. Got a 67mm filter thread, no text up front, a fairly large front element, and a nice bright 2.8 aperture, which is consistent across the entire zoom range. Got a metal mount on the back side of it with a gasket for weather sealing. It'll keep the dust and most moisture out. The zoom ring is on the front, which is a little reverse from most conventional lenses, and the focus ring is on the back. It's an electronic focus, which is kind of difficult to use accurately. It's fine for pulling manual focus for photos, but if you're trying to shoot video and pull focus on a moving subject, you're really going to have a hard time doing that because it is electronic. This lens is super lightweight and fairly small. It's very comparable to about the 18-105 APS-C lens in height, but the APS-C lens is actually a little larger in diameter with a 72mm thread, and the 28-70 is about 3/16 of an inch longer overall. It's about 5mm. The lens is constructed entirely out of plastic and is fairly lightweight, so it doesn't quite come across as premium as some of the G Master lenses or really nice Zeiss lenses. It's not full metal, so you're gonna pick this lens up and think, I wonder what the image quality is like out of this thing. It's pretty good. Let's go take a look at that. Before we get into the picture image quality, I'm gonna throw this lens on the A7 III right here, and we're gonna see what a video like this looks like through the eyes of this lens. So now we've got the Tamron 28-75 loaded up, shooting at 28mm f2.8 with autofocus enabled. It does a very good job of tracking faces and focusing very quickly and keeping on the subject. You can see that as I move around the frame, it doesn't have any trouble keeping up with where I'm moving as the video is going. All right, well, let's zoom this thing in and see what we've got here. See how it does with the face tracking at kind of a more intense focal leak. It seems to want to focus right on my eyebrows, get my eyeball. Anyways, it does a pretty good job. This lens is compatible with eye autofocus when shooting photos, so you'll be able to nail focus right on the eyeball every single time, and it works just as good as any native Sony lens. And you can see here that there's really no fiddle farting with the focus here. It pretty much sticks to me wherever I go and is very, very good. I don't see any difference between the autofocus of this lens and a native Sony lens. It does phenomenally. Let's take it back out. So this is a very, very good lens for video. I haven't had any trouble with it. As far as stabilization goes though, there is no stabilization built into the lens. You have to rely on the in-body stabilization, but that shouldn't be a huge issue because any camera past the first A7 series of cameras have got internal stabilization. The A6500 is the only APS-C body that's got it, but this is a full frame lens, and 28mm isn't super useful on the wide end of things on an APS-C body. So let's go and check out the photo image quality for this lens. So let's go ahead and take a look at one of the biggest issues that I have found with this lens, particularly on higher pixel density sensors like the A7R II and the A6500. If we take a look at this sign here, it kind of looks out of focus, and if we click to zoom in, we see that there's like a haze around everything, and it does look out of focus. Looks like there's some kind of motion blur on it, but the picture was taken at 1/250th of a second, which shouldn't have had any motion blur to begin with. But this isn't the only picture it did that on. Here's another one, same kind of thing. It's mostly in contrast areas like this, and here it is again on this higher contrast, more luminant reflection on her sunglasses there. The whole image kind of looks fuzzy and just generally unimpressive. And then here's another one, but even here where it is nice and sharp and in focus, you get kind of a hazy line coming right up through here. And I noticed that on a lot of images, especially in the brighter, higher contrasting ones, If we zoom in all the way on there, you can see that all the bright spots are very luminant. However, most of these photos that you see here were shot at 75 millimeters, 75 millimeters, 75 millimeters, 75 millimeters. All these were shot at 75 millimeters, and I think that that's partially to blame. Here's another one, actually 71 millimeters, has got the same effect as a 75 millimeter. Just general haziness. Not crazy about it. This one here was at 75 millimeters, but it's incredibly sharp. Here's an example of a photo shot at f4 here on the right and f7.1 here on the left, both of them at 75 millimeters. But check out the sharpness difference when we get zoomed in, particularly over here further to the edge. You see how blurry her shirt is and how blurry this post is on the f4. Meanwhile, the f7.1 is significantly sharper in every regard. The f4 looks like some kind of motion blur, even though it's shot at 1/500th of a second. So it is in fact just kind of the lackluster performance when it comes to subjects that are further away from the camera when you're zoomed in all the way. Now when you've got a subject that's closer and you're shooting at a shorter focal length, you get phenomenally sharp results. This is 28 millimeters, f2.8. We zoom in here and her eye is unbelievably sharp, and that's at 28 millimeters. This isn't the greatest kind of portrait, but you can see all the details of everything at the wide end of this lens. I did a little bit of astrophotography with it. This is a 20-second exposure, ISO 2000, f2.8 at 28 millimeters, and other than the rotation of the Earth causing some star streaks, it's actually incredibly sharp. I mean, you can see all the Milky Way there. Very cool looking photo. Still looking at the sharpness, here's 64 millimeters at f2.8. Look at his eyes, his eyebrows, his facial hair. It's all razor sharp. And this lens just performs incredibly well all the way up until about 70 millimeters, and then it starts to fall apart. But that's not to say it's a terrible lens when you do get to 75 millimeter. It still shoots very acceptable photos, but they're not going to be the sharpest things you've ever seen. All right, looking at the background blur, it's not the highest quality out there, but it still is pretty nice looking. You do have a little bit of a bright ring around there, which is less than desirable, but in general, it makes for some nice smooth backgrounds, especially when you get it super blown out. This here is an example of the lens at 75 millimeters, but with the subject very close to the lens. And you can see it is razor sharp as well. It really only falls apart when your subject is far from the camera and zoomed in all the way. Here's another example, 54 millimeters, f5.6. So this is just everything about this. You can't ask for a sharper lens than an image like this right here. We got a chicken or a rooster, my bad. He shows off the sharpness of this lens very well. He's pretty close to the camera, 2.8, 75 millimeters. Here's another look at the background blur. It's very consistent across everything once it gets blurry enough, with a little bbit of concentric circle kind of design to it. All right, now let's take a look at the autofocus of this. This is the tracking autofocus, burst mode on the A7 III. The combination of the two, that camera and this lens, is absolutely deadly. It's absolutely tack sharp in focus on every single one of these images, with the exception of one of them right here, I think. Yeah, and it just barely missed it. It focused on his feet instead of his face. It's still pretty stinking close and still a usable image, especially when zoomed down a little bit more. Just in focus, in focus, in focus, in focus, in focus. Every single one is remarkably good, especially for that kind of challenging situation for a camera to track a subject running straight towards it. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the more nitty-gritty, granular kind of things. All right, this is 28 millimeters, f2.8 and f8. f2.8 on the left, f8 on the right. So if we zoom in right here in the middle all the way, let's take it to 2:1 here. There's not a difference. At 28 millimeters, I don't see any difference. There's a little bit more magenta in the 2.8 versus the f8, but as far as sharpness goes in the center, there is no difference between the two. Let's move over to the edge here. There's not 5% difference in sharpness between these two apertures. You can shoot wherever you want at 28 millimeters and you're going to get sharp photos. All right, now we're at 50 millimeters where things start to change. We got f8 on the right, f2.8 on the left. There is still more magenta in the f2.8. The f8 is more neutral colored, not as much fringing. The sharpness is still indistinguishably close in the center, And once you get closer to the edges over here, you start to finally see a difference in the sharpness. So you can see there's obviously some blurriness, some kind of ghosting looking stuff on the f2.8 at 50 millimeters. At f8, that's all remedied, and you end up with a fairly sharp image still with a little less sharpness than the center. All right, now we're at 75 millimeters, f8 on the right, f2.8 on the left. Zooming into the middle here, we can see a little bit more of that haziness that we were seeing in the other images. Right along the bottom of this tree limb here, it's corrected at f8. Moving over towards the corners, we can see continual haziness on these more contrasted areas, and it's corrected by f8. And then moving all the way up to the corners here, we see that some vignetting is taken away. It's a little bit brighter over here. The main trunks of this tree are sharpened up, but it makes the chromatic aberration a little bit more apparent with a little bit of red and blue on either side of that. So across the board, we get an improvement at f8, which is pretty expected. But when it comes to the wider focal lengths, it's pretty stinking impressive at how this thing shoots when shot wide open. So as you can see, in general, this lens performs very, very well. However, it's kind of an enigma as to what you'll actually get photo to photo. I had some photos in there that looked amazing. I had some photos in there that were kind of lackluster, and it was like there was no difference between these two except for maybe some of the most minor things. I can't really pinpoint why that is, but for the most part, you're gonna get solid image quality coming from this lens. So thanks for watching, you guys. If you're interested in purchasing this lens, there's links down below that will really help out this channel. Leave me a like, go ahead and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.